Uga Booga, my fellow Beras. Welcome back to another episode of the Moose Meets Berachain Ecosystem Spotlight series. Today I have MXN from Beradrome with me. Hey Ben, how you doing?
BM, hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I recall Beradrome like being one of the earliest protocols to launch like on the NFT side, right? So looking forward to our chat to hear more about Beradrome and what you guys have been doing for like the past year or so.
Yeah, thanks for having us, first of all. Man, what have we been doing? It's been a long time since we launched our NFT. I think like almost 500 days now
Mm-hmm.
since deployment of the contract. So maybe I just start with like, what's Beradrome?
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Please go ahead.
so I'm sure like since you're like a DeFi podcast, your listeners are familiar with like Velodrome and Aerodrome and how that stuff works. So Beradrome you can essentially see as a liquidity marketplace on Berachain, and it functions very similar to like Velodrome or Aerodrome, except there are some major differences. So first of all is that we basically work with any yield-bearing asset. So we're not a DEX or a lending protocol. We essentially integrate other protocols into like a solidly style incentive coordinator. So how that works is for example, let's say if you LP on a DEX on Berachain, you could essentially restake your LP instead of staking it with the DEX on Berachain. For example, let's say you would use Kodiak, you would stake it into Beradrome. And then you would essentially farm the Beradrome token and the trading fees go to the voters of that gauge. So it works very similar to Velodrome and Aerodrome. You have that whole solidly style voting system where the trading fees, swap fees, and all that goes to the voters, and the Beradrome emission token goes to the LPs.
Mm-hmm.
But the major difference here is that this can work for any yield-bearing asset. So we could implement like a lending protocol, for example, a perps platform, like even a game. Like as long as you have like a receipt token and it's yield bearing, we can implement it into Beradrome. And that works essentially via plugins. So a plugin, you can imagine, is just a simple smart contract that basically moves stuff around on chain in a DeFi fashion. So like I described earlier, the way the rewards are shifted and the way that the LPs are shifted, it's essentially a smart contract that we individually build for any protocol that we integrate. The other few differences is we have no more lockups. So I'm sure like you're aware that like all these solidly styled DEXs, they have like maximum 4-year lockups. We completely removed that. So the only time you have to lock up your tokens to participate in that voting game is 7 days. The reason for 7 days is that in all these kind of solidly style DEXs or Velodrome or Aerodrome, the epoch where you can vote on gauges and like what kind of rewards you want to be getting and where you want to like allocate your voting power, it takes like 7 days. So that's why we did it in that fashion. So if you decide like, hey, I want to participate in this Beradrome voting epoch, but I don't want to like stick around any longer. I just want to use this epoch. You can do that. You can stake your token. It essentially becomes voting power, and you can then vote for 7 days. And then you could unstake again, and then you could dump it or move on with your life, or whatever have you. Yeah,
Gotcha.
there's a few more advantages we have, but I can get into that later, I guess.
Yep. So I was just wondering, right? Like, would the users like myself, if we were to kind of stake the LP with Veradrome and then vote for the following week, then would I have to redo that action every week as there's no lockup period?
No, so if you do not decide to unstake, you it essentially stays locked, and then you can vote again, right? So the vote carries over to the next epoch. But if you say, "Hey, I want to get out," you can essentially reset your vote. There's like a button on the UI, and then it unstakes again, and you have your token back, and then you can do whatever you want.
Is that like immediately or do we wait for the next epoch?
No, it's like basically immediately.
Nice. All right. Interesting. Gotcha. Right. And I mean, for those who are not familiar with the Solidly model, right, please go check it out and then you can have a read at Beradrome docs as well. And my question next would then be how does this, I mean, you kind of run through it already, but like, what else does this make it different from the original Solidly model or like other aerodrome and all the forks like aerodrome and all, right?
Yeah, so maybe I just start with the tokenomics. So we got 3 tokens. So there's O-Barrel, which is the emission token that goes to the LPs, as I mentioned before, right? If you're an LP, you restake, you get the emission token, which is O-Barrel. We have Barrel, which is the base token of the protocol, and we have High Barrel, which is the locked version or staked version or whatever you want to call it, right? So as described earlier, if you have Barrel, for example, you can stake it or lock it for 7 days for the epoch, and it becomes High Barrel. High because of hibernation, bears, all that stuff, you get it. And that is then staked for 7 days, and you can participate in the voting. O-Barrel is not like a standard token, it's like a call option essentially. So O-Barrel, when that is being emitted to you, you can essentially buy the Barrel token at the floor price. So what's the floor price? How does that work? So Barrel essentially runs on the bonding curve. And in the bonding curve, you always have like 2 tokens, right, which back each other. So we decided, since it's Berachain, we decided to, what could we use as the base token for this bonding curve? Like, how can we inject more yield and more fees into this flywheel, this solidly style flywheel? So we went for IBGT. So IBGT is essentially like the liquid staking derivative of BGT. Maybe I just explain quickly what BGT is. So on
Mm-hmm.
Berachain, um, Berachain essentially emits BGT. If you stake liquidity, you get BGT emitted, and BGT is essentially the governance, which you can bribe validators, and you can decide where the emissions go in the native Berachain chain integrated dApps. And IBGT, since BGT is soulbound, right? You cannot transfer it, but you could burn it to bearer if you want it. But BGT itself, since it's not transferable, cannot be used on the bonding curve. So we went for IBGT, which is essentially, you can imagine it like the staked ETH, sort of like staked, like the liquid version of BGT on Berachain. So let me just describe how the bonding curve works, right? So you have 2 tokens, which is Barrel and IBGT. And essentially in this bonding curve is like a XYK, like Uniswap style bonding curve. So if you were to buy Barrel in the bonding curve, right, you would need to use IBGT to swap for Barrel. And that essentially ends up in the bonding curve, right? And the price essentially of Barrel goes up depending on how the market moves, right? So let's say for some reason somebody aped 100K into the bonding curve, right, worth of IBGT, and now Barrel is, let's say, $20, right? But IBGT itself is $10, right? So you have $20. Barrel is the market price, and IBGT would be $10. So let's say you farmed O-Barrel, which is that call option I described earlier. So O-Barrel, as an LP, now gives you the opportunity to buy Barrel at the bonding curve floor price. So what is the floor price? 1 Barrel is always backed by 1 IBGT. And in this example that I just mentioned, we said $10, right? So you can see there's like an up opportunity here, right? Because the market price of Barrel on the bonding curve is currently $20, but the IBGT price is $10. So you could then use that 1 O Barrel that you farmed to essentially buy 1 Barrel for $10, and then your profit obviously would be the delta. So that would be then $10, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you could decide, you get that Barrel out, and then you can decide, okay, I'm going to dump it, I'm going to stake it and participate in the voting game, or whatever you want.
Gotcha. Interesting. Right then, no, so it's just farming Obero and then assuming that there is a difference in price between the IBGT and the Bearer token, users could then up price difference between the 2 tokens, right? And
Yeah, and
eventually until they
the
both become like more or less the same price.
right. So at the beginning, it would be essentially 0 because Obero would be 0 because nobody has bought anything, right? So the bonding curve is at now, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other cool thing that other solidly style dApps don't have is that thanks to the bonding curve, you can borrow IBGT out of that bonding curve, right? So let's say you staked your barrel for an epoch, right? You can essentially borrow IBGT out of the bonding curve as long as you have your barrel staked. And there's no liquidations and there's no price oracle involved, thanks to the bonding curve, because we have a floor price for Barrow always, right? So we don't need to run any liquidation or any interest. We need to charge any interest, none of that. And that makes it like really capital efficient to participate in this game, right? Because while you vote and you earn all these rewards like swap fees, maybe validator rewards and all this kind of stuff, you could also borrow IBGT out of the bonding curve while you participate in the voting game, right? So you don't basically you lock tokens for a week. They don't just sit there and just you can just use them to vote, but you could also use them to borrow IBGT, and then you could use that again. And you could go over to infrared and stake it for fees, or you could sell it, and maybe you want to speculate on something else in the meantime, and then pay it back, or leave it as it is. So it's quite versatile and like very capital efficient that way to participate in that game.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, really interesting to actually dive into all this and think of the potential strategies to be played around when Beradrome and the Bera token comes out.
Yeah, every time I explain it, I realize it's so freaking complicated. But yeah, I try to break it down as simple as possible. Like once you used it, it's like very, especially if you've used Aerodrome or Velodrome before, it's like second nature with just a couple cooler features, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, I think the best way to learn is always go hands-on and click around.
yeah, we'll be live on testnet when the V2 comes out. I'm not sure if I can drop alpha here, but it's not very long until the next testnet comes, because the previous one, we had like an internal testnet running, but the problem was that the chain basically doesn't really work. Like it works sometimes, or some features
Mhm.
don't work, and therefore the IBGT token wasn't really working, so we couldn't really fully play around. But yeah, on V2 that should be straightforward, and all the features should be working.
Yeah. All right. And bringing back to the point where you talked about being able to borrow IBGT and use it on other platforms, right? That brings me to the liquidity trifecta. Do you want to go a bit deeper on that?
Mm. Yeah, so Liquidity Trifecta is a cooperation between three protocols, which is Kodiak, which is a DEX on Berachain, Yeet, which is some Yeet-hearted protocol where you yeet your bearer and the last person wins, and Beradrome, which is us, right, which I already delved into now. So how that works is, let's say in the case of Yeet, right, they would LP on Yeet bearer, so their token pair will be Yeet. The Yeet token will be paired with bearer, and they would LP it on Kodiak, and then they would restake that into a Beradrome gauge. And the reason we have different gauges, this liquidity trifecta gauge is special in a way because it's meant to attract more liquidity. Duh. And the way that works is, so let's say Yeet has restaked that LP token they get from Kodiak, and they restake it into Beradrome. If you were to farm, so if you were to like participate as an LP, like you would put your Yeet and Bearer into Kodiak and then restake it into Beradrome, into the gauge, you would get like a plethora of tokens, right? So you would farm O-Barrel, as I mentioned earlier, right? You would get KDK and XKDK emissions from the Kodiak DEX, and the voters in return would get like Yeet bribes. They would get Bearer, because Yeet also generates Bearer, right? And they would get a part of the swap fees as well from the actual LP. Plus, the liquidity trifecta gauges also get additional voting rewards from our validator. So Beradrome also runs a validator in cooperation with the Honeyjar. So we essentially split that 50-50. And like when you run a validator, obviously, you get fees, right? You get BGT, you get
Mm-hmm.
gas fees, you do MEV, all this kind of stuff, right? And that can then be pumped back into the flywheel, right? So for this liquidity trifecta gauge, then we also take a certain allocation of these validator rewards and put them back into the voting flywheel. So that's why it's called the liquidity trifecta, because you get such a huge amount of tokens by participating in it. And trifecta, obviously, because there's three protocols involved.
All right, awesome. The more I listen to all this, the more I'm convinced that when Berachain comes out, it's gonna be DeFi Summer 2.0.
Yeah, for sure, man. I feel the same way. Like when I design these kind of things, like it reminds me back of, like what is it, Curve, when I first used it, and Sushi and Uniswap and all that stuff. But this time, we have like the experience of using it. Plus, there's like a flywheel built into the actual chain, right, and into the protocols that feeds everything. So it should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, man, totally. Yeah, and actually I have a question on
Hmm.
the Bero token, right? Where you guys have the reserve, the market reserve there, right? I'm looking at the docs right
Yeah,
now. So, like,
yeah.
what are the plans with that? Do you want to talk about on the market reserves?
So that's kind of complicated to run through the numbers, but essentially there's a certain amount that you could borrow out of the bonding curve. You obviously cannot borrow more than what is in there, right? That would cause bad debt. So there's always a floor reserve to facilitate the swapping and all that stuff, right? And whatever is not in the flow reserve can essentially be borrowed out in the bonding curve. So if you were like, if let's say everything could be borrowed, we could still facilitate swaps because obviously you need like base like liquidity for people to swap in between the two tokens. That's why we have like a reserve.
Yep. And then the next thing would then be, you guys have the NFTs been around like you mentioned, like what, 500 days ago, right?
Yeah,
Uh and like, do you want to talk about what's the utility of the NFTs, like what's the purpose and all?
sure. Should be pretty clear by now, although like many people can't read and they still don't understand. It's in the docs under airdrop. It's like crystal clear written down what the community gets, right? So there's obviously different rarity scores for these NFTs. We have legendaries, right, of which there are only 69, and they're really horrible looking, but yeah, people pay 3 ETH for them, I guess. And we have obviously rarer NFTs and less rare NFTs, and depending on obviously the quantity you hold and the rarity, we have some internal magic math that decides how much you get airdropped. So the airdrop is essentially two different tokens. One would be you can claim your O barrel, and then you could decide, okay, I have two options. I redeem that, I exercise the option, and I get barrel token, and I do whatever, I dump it or I stake it. The other option is you could burn this O barrel into voting power. So if you have voting power, all you could do is participate in voting on gauges and get the fees. But all the fancy stuff like borrowing against it will not work because obviously it's just burned and you just have voting power then. So that's what you could do with the airdrop. Majority of the high barrels, so of the already staked airdrop, will go to the legendary NFTs. All the math is in the docs. Like I can't remember the exact numbers now. Yeah, and also with the NFTs, we will be starting beta testing pretty soon. So once V2 testnet is out, if you have a legendary, you're guaranteed access. And if you have a normal NFT, basically you're also guaranteed access, but you have to do like a little bit more effort. You have to join one of our completely retarded game nights with our e-girl, where we play like crap game, which is basically a squid game in Steam, like very bad graphics, but it's the same kind of thing. And then if you participate there, you can also get beta access. We have a few more things planned because obviously we want them. They're kind of like OG blue chip Berachain NFTs, apart from obviously the chain rebases themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some ideas to after the airdrop how we can retain value with maybe like future airdrops or increased rewards and stuff like that if you hold that stuff. Because obviously it's kind of stupid. You have the NFT airdrop and just goes to zero, right? Like we obviously don't want that.
Do like the boosted APY with the NFTs.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, okay, got it. Right, and what's next for Beradrome, right? Obviously, you guys are preparing for the Berachain testnet V2, and of course waiting for the mainnet launch. But like, what's next for you guys?
So I don't know if you've seen it, but we just announced our wheel deal, which basically we partnered with 13 protocols on Berachain that are building there, and we raised $2 million worth of bribes. So maybe just go quickly through it, how that works.
Mm-hmm.
So in our tokenomics, we have 50% of the initial supply reserved for protocols and DAOs that work on on Berachain, right? And we thought of like, first of all, the plan was just give it away, but then we were like, that doesn't really make that much sense. So we thought of like a token swap mechanism. So if you like a project, for example, Yeet, guaranteed a certain percent of their supply as bribes, and we in return give them a certain supply of the token and burn them into their wallet, and then they have voting power. So essentially, it's like a commitment from protocols that they will use, a certain dollar amount to bribe on Beradrome,
Mm-hmm.
and that in total is then $2 million we raised. And the cool thing about this is that once we go live, that 50% of the supply is already burned, right? Because these people already committed, right? So that you can essentially already take that out of circulation, because it's just voting power that these protocols get. So that's something we just did. And next thing, obviously, is then V2 testnet. We also want to attend more conferences and stuff. We just attended the Token 2049 Armageddon Rain shower in Dubai. One of our guys was there, and the three of us, including me, will be in Singapore at Token 2049. So I guess I'll see you there, and whoever's listening there, we
Yes,
can
sir.
meet up, hand out lawsuits and stuff. We have some cool plans for that event, actually.
Yeah, looking forward. And by the way, no, I'm sorry I'm out of touch or out of the loop with this. What's with the lawsuit joke going on?
um, I don't know how it came about. Actually, we just started shit posting on Twitter like years ago when it was still pretty early. And whenever somebody tagged us, we just said we're suing you for infringement and stuff like that, and it became like a meme, right? So now it's basically protocols saying like, hey, please don't sue us. We will commit bribes. We don't want a Beradrome lawsuit. That's how it came about, I guess.
Got it, got it. Thanks for filling me in. Right.
Yeah,
And like what's the
not
end
actual
goal, like
lawsuits. Don't worry.
sorry, go ahead.
We don't even have a lawyer, so don't worry. Like no actual lawsuits.
Yeah, man. Love the jokes and funs, right? Yeah. What's the end goal for you guys then? Like, what's the end goal for Beradrome? You guys looking to be like the biggest, solidly fork, TVL bribes and all, or what's your plan?
Yeah, so we want to be the main incentive and liquidity coordinator on Berachain. That's basically our goal, right? There's not really any competition on Berachain for that. There's some protocols that do something similar, but we actually found out some ways to partner together. So to make the protocol even larger, I guess. And the good thing about how it works is that the protocols you work with, they don't lose any TVL, right? Because the liquidity is still there, right? You just restake it on Beradrome. So it's a good way to, cooperate together. It's not like we're stealing anything from anyone. It's just a way to, rework how the mechanics work of the whole DeFi system. Yeah, so hope that works out. I have high hopes since we just raised the 2 million in bribes, so we already put some dollars into our community's empty pockets before the chain is even live. So I think that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking forward, man. And if you're talking a lot about all the how the solidly model works and you guys doing the calculations and all, just curious, what is your background and like what's the team's background? Like you guys from previous protocol in DeFi or yeah, let's hear it from you.
Yeah, so my background is this is my third cycle. I started in 2017 mining ETH. Um, I was actually living in Singapore, and I had a condo with a bomb shelter. And I went down to the local electronics market, and I bought like 18 GPUs or something. And then I started mining Ethereum in my bomb shelter on like microwave racks with like cables hanging everywhere. And there was like, I don't know, 60 degrees in that room. That's how I got started with crypto. Then I worked for some big ICO companies back in 2017. And before I started Beradrome, I was working on with an L2 in the space, one of the first L2s, one of the first OP chains to go live, actually. Then I left to start Beradrome. So I'm full-time Beradrome for, since ever we exist. I'm pretty much the only full-time founder member. The other guys are mostly it's their second cycle, so they lost everything obviously in the last cycle. Either if they kept it, they lost it on FTX, and if they didn't, they got liquidated somewhere else. But yeah, we have team which is pretty retarded. We have our artists, right? We have an e-girl, we have BD guys, we have devs, obviously. Otherwise, there would be no protocol, right? Yeah, that's the background of my background and the team's background.
All right, awesome. Well, I didn't know that you could be mining Ethereum in bomb shelters.
Yeah, you could. I think I mined like 50 or 60 ETH back then in just a couple months. So it was pretty sick.
Well, I hope the electricity bill like wasn't too crazy, or like the landlord will be going after you.
No, the cool thing was that electricity was uncapped in my contract, and I just,
Ooh,
got away with it as long as I could until the landlord said, "Hey, we're gonna change the contract or you're out of the unit." And basically that's why I mined only for a couple months, right? But yeah, I made best use of it, I guess.
gotcha. This is not advice for anyone who's listening to mine anything
Yeah,
in your bomb shelters.
yeah. Anyhow, now it's proof of stake, right? So
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. All right. I think that's all I have for Beradrome today. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about that we might have missed?
no, not really. I think I got everything.
All right then. If not, I thank you so much for your time, coming on and explaining what Beradrome is about and the interesting features that we can look forward to when it comes up on the testnet to play around with. And as usual, all the links will be down below in the description box, so highly recommend that you guys check them out. If not, that is the end of this episode, and we will see you in the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me, dude.